The Bloc Québécois jumped from 10 to 32 seats in last week's federal election. That's significant in practical terms because it means the difference between not having party status and having it, with all the resources and privileges that go with that. But what it also means in political terms is far more consequential. With us to help explain why, from our studio at Queen's University in Kingston, Stéphanie Chouinard. She is assistant professor in the Department of Political Science at the Royal Military College and Queen's University. And here in our studio, Emily Laxer, assistant professor of sociology at York University's Glendon College and the author of Unveiling the Nation, The Politics of Secularism in France and Quebec. And we are delighted to welcome Stéphanie, you back to our program. And Emily, you here for the first time. And let me just say off the top, some people who've been in Ontario for a long time may recognize your last name. James Laxer was your dad.
Correct.
And he did a show here in the 1980s called The Real Story.
He did.
So we are delighted to have you here for the first time.
Pleasure.
And we remember him fondly. Let's just, Sheldon, should we bring these graphics up? A little quick history here, because the Bloc is now the third place party in the House of Commons once it convenes. They knocked the NDP into fourth place, and let's do a quick recap of the Bloc's history. They started in 1993, and in that first election, under Lucien Bouchard's leadership, they went right to the official opposition. From 97 to 2008, they were the third party in the House under Gilles Duceppe. In 2011 and 2015, tough times. No party status, no official party status. Only 4 seats in 2011, 10 seats in 2015. But here they are, 2019, they are back in third place. And let's take a look at the map of the province of Quebec and just see how the seats all unfolded. This doesn't give you quite an accurate indication because the Bloc has so many of the seats in more rural parts of the province where the ridings are so much bigger, but you can see, and I'll describe it for those listening on podcast, the Bloc obviously has a significant chunk of the seats now. The Liberals are still the most popular party in Quebec, 35 seats to the Bloc's 32. The Conservatives got 10, and there's one new Democrat. And let's just take a closer look around the island of Montreal, and you see that one right in the middle, that one little orange seat. Boy, down from 59 2 elections ago. Montreal is still red, but then, of course, a lot of Bloc support all around that. Stéphanie, start us off here. We want to know, the Bloc's been around for 26 years now. What does it stand for today that maybe it didn't stand for when it first started off?
Well, in 1993, when the party was created, in fact, they were only hoping to be there for after one election. So when Lucien Bouchard created the Bloc in 1993, he only wanted one term because he fully expected that the 1995 referendum would go through. And so that by the time the next federal election would come around, that Quebec would not be part of that election anymore. So in 1993, it was a much more separatist movement than it is today. If we compare with the rhetoric of the leader now, Monsieur Blanchet, he barely spoke about secession or separatism at all during this election. He's much more attuned to a nationalist tone, but nevertheless who wants to collaborate with Canada. The end game for the Bloc Québécois is still secession. However, they're quite aware that this is probably not going to happen in the short term. And so in the meanwhile, they stand for Quebec interests, but are willing to collaborate.
So they are less, Emily, of a separatist party today than they used to be, but where on the political spectrum would you put them?
I think the Bloc Québécois has shifted somewhat in its ideological composition. It has moved somewhat rightward since the 15-year tenure of Gilles Duceppe. It has become a party that is relatively business-oriented, that is committed, particularly under Yves-François Blanchet, to gaining Quebec the best possible deal within the Canadian Federation. But it also is progressive on the environment. It is anti-pipeline. It cares about climate change. And I think we're going to see that become a significant issue under the leadership of Blanchet and this minority government. And
why do you think they are downplaying the whole issue of either secession or separation or sovereignty or whatever you want to call it?
Well, purely for strategic reasons. I mean, it is quite obvious now when you look at polls over the last several years that the Québécois are less and less interested in sovereignty, in the actual independence of Quebec from Canada. For most Québécois, a majority believe that this is an issue that is behind them. Young voters in particular, those aged 18 to 25, support for sovereignty is under 20%. So this is no longer as much of a mobilizing issue as it once was. And I think that the Bloc Québécois over the last several years has been doing some soul searching to think about how it is going to reframe its message as a nationalist one rather than an explicitly sovereigntist one.
Stéphanie, can you tell tell us, this is a party that only campaigns, obviously, and only runs for seats in the province of Quebec. So the rest of the country may not know as much about Yves-François Blanchet as they clearly do in Quebec. Tell us a bit about him. What's his background?
Monsieur Blanchet is actually a quite interesting character. For many, many years, he was part of the music industry. And so for some people who might know of Éric Lapointe, who's a singer in Quebec, he used to be his agent for many years. And so in about a decade ago, he decided to get into politics, and he was elected under the short-lived government of Pauline Marois in the early 2010s, and he was Minister of Environment at the time. And it's actually quite interesting to compare his positions when he was Provincial Minister of Environment to his positions on environment as Bloc leader. His rhetoric regarding pipelines and petroleum exploitation, for example, has changed quite a bit. He's a little bit less pro-pipeline than he was at the time.
And can you, Emily, tell us, the two legendary Bloc leaders, I guess, Lucien Bouchard and Gilles Duceppe, can you tell us how Blanchet compares either in demeanor or tone or leadership style with those two gentlemen?
I think he combines a lot of qualities that explain why he's popular among Quebecers today. He's sort of a business-savvy, no-nonsense guy. He has a very, I think, pragmatic approach to expressing the nationalist tone in Quebec today, something that appeals to Quebec voters. And I think he, in that sense, aligns quite closely with the current Coalition Avenir Québec government run by François Legault at the provincial level, which is also a kind of business-minded provincial party, and I think he aligns quite closely with that vision. But he has a personal style that's quite appealing. I think he was able to rise above the fray to some extent, particularly in the French language debate, and speak on behalf of the interests of Quebecers.
We should spend a bit of time here talking about Bill 21, which of course is the bill that prevents religious symbols for those who work in the public service, prevents people from wearing them. If there ever were an example of how Quebec is a distinct society compared to the rest of Canada, that issue really does explain it, because the majority in Quebec clearly sees that issue differently from how people in the rest of Canada do. Any sense, Emily, about how that issue either helped or didn't, or propelled the BQ campaign along throughout the writ period?
I absolutely do think it helped. Partway through the campaign in early October, Premier François Legault distinctly demanded that the four other major party leaders in the country take an explicit position on whether or not they would intervene using the federal levers of power to challenge Bill 21. This is a bill that is massively popular among the Québécois, particularly francophones. It is overwhelmingly popular among Bloc Québécois voters. And I think that in expressing, in bringing that issue to the forefront, or partway through the election, François Legault really lured, and with the help of Blanchet, of course, lured the other federal leaders into having a conversation about Quebec's autonomy within the Canadian Federation, which, as we know, is a very mobilizing storyline for nationalists in particular in Quebec.
Stéphanie, I want you to help us understand why Bill 21, which in the rest of Canada very many people see as out-and-out racist, is somehow seen differently inside the province of Quebec. Help us understand that.
Okay, so there's two types of electorates that a bill like Bill 21 can appeal to in Quebec. And one of those electorates is maybe a little bit more nationalistic and rural, and sees the Quebecois identity as something to be protected. And so the waves of immigration that arrive in Quebec can be seen as something that's perhaps a little bit more problematic. However, there is another electorate in Quebec who sees the principle of laïcité as being at the center of Bill 21. And Emily can probably explain laïcité a little bit better than I can, because it doesn't translate very well in English. It doesn't translate directly to what we usually call in English secularism. And so this is more of a Republican electorate that has in mind the history of the Révolution tranquille, for example, and who is very much attuned to the fact that religion in Quebec had to be expelled from the public realm. And so with the role of the Catholic Church in the history of Quebec, any kind of religious representation in the realm of the state is seen as something to address. And so this other kind of electorate doesn't see any issue with immigration. It's really about how the state represents the people.
You want to pick up on laïcité and why it's a big thing in
Absolutely.
Quebec and why the rest of the country seems not to get it?
Absolutely. I think, as Stéphanie points out, I mean, this ties into Quebec's sort of unique history in terms of the controversial but the very closely remembered role of the Catholic Church in Quebec society, which sort of governed over many affairs within the province until the Quiet Revolution, which many feminists in Quebec remember as a dark time, as a time when religious authorities were impinging upon women's rights and freedoms. This is why you see a strong feminist contingent in favor of legislation like Bill 21, using this notion of laïcité, which, as Stephanie points out, is not exactly the same thing as secularism. It really represents sort of the neutrality of the state is what it means. But it's certainly true that in passing this kind of legislation, I think that the PQ and with the help of the the CAQ and with the help of the Bloc Québécois is sort of resuscitating a certain nationalist instinct in Quebec and channeling that through raising these questions, and I think through exploiting and fueling a kind of fear that the majority Francophone culture may be diluted by the influx of immigrants from different parts of the world who have different religious convictions.
We're, of course, in the rest of Canada, where multiculturalism is the thing, but I gather interculturalism is what they talk about in Quebec. Explain that.
That's right. So multiculturalism is sort of a boogeyman for a lot of nationalist politicians, intellectuals, policymakers in Quebec. It kind of represents the federal government's attempt to dilute Quebec's claim to being a distinct society by placing all sources of difference, all minorities on an equal plane. And so for many nationalists in Quebec, it's part and parcel of a federalist project that seeks to sort of diminish Quebec's status within the Federation. In response, many intellectuals and policymakers have proposed, it is not official policy, but it appears in some policy documents, have proposed this discourse of interculturalism, which celebrates diversity, but does so alongside the explicit promotion of a core kind of common French-speaking public culture. So it's quite different from multiculturalism in that sense.
Got it. Stephanie, let's follow up on this. We remember during the English language leaders debate that the leaders were mostly sort of tripping over each other to assure that they would not use the power of the federal government to intervene as this case against Bill 21 winds its way through the court system. Justin Trudeau was, I guess, the only leader who sort of said, I want to reserve for myself the right to possibly, potentially, maybe intervene somewhere down the road if, and anyway, it got a bit convoluted. Can you sort of help us trace the path of Bill 21 through the courts and where you see it going if it goes one way and where you see it going if it goes another way?
I think no matter which way it's going, the way it's going is towards the Supreme Court, quite honestly. I believe whether it is members of civil society who are challenging this bill or the Quebec government who might want to appeal to whatever first decision comes out, it's going to make its way to the Supreme Court. This is something that no matter whether the federal government decides to intervene, we will probably see a clear answer from the Supreme Court at some point or another in a couple of years.
And is there any question in your mind but that if the Supreme Court decides that this law is unconstitutional, the government of Quebec will simply use its powers in the notwithstanding clause to set aside the court decision, and it'll still be the law anyway?
That's a possibility that has been mentioned by Monsieur Legault. However, what the Supreme Court will probably do if it gets to that point, and what it has tended to do with cases such as this one that pertain to Quebec liberties and freedoms, is that it will invoke the Quebec Charter of Rights and Freedoms rather than the Canadian one, which in a lot of respects is very similar in text. But obviously, if you use a Quebec law rather than a Canadian one, especially for a more nationalist audience, will bear a different symbolic. So that's what I'm expecting will come out of this.
Interesting. So, Emily, what's your view on whether or not they'd use the notwithstanding clause to set aside a potential Supreme Court decision against Bill 21?
Well, I think they've already stated quite clearly that this is what they intend to do. Whether or not this actually goes in that direction in terms of its legal trajectory, I think that the use of that clause has huge symbolic resonance. It sort of indicates it is a representation of the fact that the Quebec government under the CAQ is standing firm and saying we refuse to allow the federal government to prevent us from advancing our own interests in this area.
Stephanie, let me get you in on this one here. We had a pollster named Erin Kelly from Advanced Symbolics on the program throughout the election campaign, and she was surveying more than 275,000 people through artificial intelligence algorithms and so on, and doing her polling. And she concluded, based on what she was picking up in her surveying, that not Bill 21, but rather the pipeline, the potential of building a pipeline to Quebec, that was one of the big issues that helped the Bloc Québécois. Can you get to sort of the foundation of what that issue is all about and tell us why it would have been so resonant in the province?
Sure. So the idea of the Energy East pipeline making its way all the way to Saguenay is an issue that is quite divisive in the country, and Quebecers are overwhelmingly against this idea. I think since the Lac Mégantic tragedy in Quebec, the idea of transporting oil through Quebec is not gaining a whole lot of traction. It's seen as something that's quite dangerous, and the Quebec electorate, as most Eastern Canadians, are becoming more and more wary of environmental outcomes, and so this idea of a pipeline has just not played out well, especially for the Conservatives who were having this idea of an energetic corridor throughout the country. And so with Mr. Blanchet, for example, who at one time was actually a proponent of such kind of an idea, this proposal has just garnered a lot of I'm sorry, I'm missing the word here.
Opposition?
A lot of people, a lot of adversity in Quebec.
Right. Now, does anybody point out the fact that because they've got Hydro-Quebec and because they are able to generate their electricity, in about as clean a way as you get with hydroelectric power, that they can afford to be very virtuous on pipelines? I mean, there is a bit of it's a bit cute by half in some respects, isn't it?
Certainly, Quebec has the chance of having this huge hydroelectric grid, which allows it not only to supply itself in terms of electricity, but also to sell it to other provinces and also to the United States. And that doesn't mean that hydroelectricity doesn't have environmental impacts. However, once the dams are built, that's sort of the impact. At the time where Manix 5, for example, was built, environmental assessments and assessments for Indigenous peoples, for example, was not something that was on the radar. But now Quebec has those dams, and it's a huge source of revenue for the state.
Mm-hmm. Emily, let's try this. The Liberals, of course, are wiped out in Saskatchewan and Alberta. Mm-hmm. They've lost all their seats there. Mm-hmm. They are now essentially, almost even with the Bloc in the province of Quebec in terms of seat representation. Where do you think this leaves the whole discussion about energy and pipelines and so on? Mm-hmm. Given the opposition in Quebec, given the lack of representation in the West, what's the poor federal government supposed to do now?
I don't envy them. I think that they're going to have a really difficult time navigating. They now have two strong regional voices being represented by different parties in government, and they're going to have to negotiate with them. I think it's going to be, in the case of Blanchet, he's indicated that he's willing to cooperate with the federal government on a kind of case-by-case basis. I think it's going to be a kind of quid pro quo style of cooperation that he's going to undertake, where he's going to agree to support various pieces of legislation in exchange for things that are of interest to Quebec. But there's no doubt that he's going to fight hard on the pipeline, and he's going to push the federal government in the area of the carbon tax, for example, to go farther, which is something that voters in Alberta, particularly Conservatives, are not going to appreciate.
So that's interesting, because of course Blanchet always said from the beginning, we have no interest in participating in any kind of coalition with the government. We're going to be on the sidelines representing Quebec's interests. But you can imagine circumstances where the Bloc would use its seats to support the Liberal government under some circumstances.
I think it remains to be seen, but I do think that Blanchet has a very pragmatic approach to what his role is going to be in this upcoming government. I think he doesn't want to lose his capacity to have that voice, and so we'll see what he does. But it's going to be, again, a kind of case-by-case relationship that he's going to undertake. No kind of formal coalition. He would not consider that, but some kind of quid pro quo, I could imagine.
Stephanie, in our last minute here, can you look ahead to when the House eventually convenes and tell us how you see the Bloc Québécois playing whatever parliamentary role they have in mind?
Well, with the NDP supporting a lot of welfare state measures such as universal pharmacare and measures that sort of impinge on provincial jurisdiction, I think the Bloc Québécois is actually going to ask for, and this is a classic Quebec line, ask for the right of exit with full compensation if the federal government decides to go on shared cost programs notably in the domain of healthcare and childcare, for example. So this is something that I foresee. In the domain of environment, I think the NDP and the Bloc Québécois are actually going to be working together to push the Liberal government further, and this might be to the detriment, of course, of the interests of the West. So that might bring a more divisive rhetoric in the federation. So that's something that I'm quite worried about personally. But the NDP and the Bloc are actually quite aligned in terms of environmental goals, and together they have the power to get the Liberal government to move further.
That's Stéphanie Chouinard from Queen's University and RMC, and Emily Laxer is here in our Toronto studio from York University, and we are delighted to have had the two of you on TVO tonight. Thanks so much. Merci beaucoup et à la prochaine.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.